Hi, I'm International Grandmaster Ron W. Henley, and welcome to our bonus coverage of Round 6 of the 2012 World Chess Olympiad being played in Istanbul. This game, from onlinechesslessons.net, comes from Board 2, where Azerbaijan was taking apart Croatia, primarily thanks to winning the white side of two very sharp Slav defenses. We're going to take a look at the game from Board 3 of that match with GM Mamedyarov, rated 2729, against GM Brkic, rated 2587. Let's take a look. D4, D5, C4, C6, Knight C3, Knight out, E3, E6, Knight F3, Knight BD7, very popular variation for black, and now Queen C2. This quiet, unpretentious move was brought into the spotlight with huge success from the 12th world champion Anatoly Karpov. In my recently published Win Like Karpov, now available at onlinechesslessons.net, on page 69, I list about 20, imagine that, 20 games that Karpov won against top-class GMs with 6 Queen C2. This was really quite a workhorse of his, and in fact, he even beat some of these players like Anand, Kramnik, Gurevich more than once in this variation. So let's see how black plays. Black plays bishop d6. Now the idea, of course, with Queen c2 is that you want to play bishop e2, maybe play e4, sometimes play bishop d2, complete your mobilization. But the main point of Queen e2 is that it does make the e4 advance possible, as we will see in this game after bishop d6, e4. Now Karpov usually preferred the quiet build-up with bishop e2, castles, and then maybe rook d1, for example. In this game, after bishop d6, white plays the immediate e4. And after d takes e4, knight e4, knight e4, queen takes, and now here black plays very enterprising, very interesting e5, immediate pawn break. More common is knight to f6, or attacking the white queen, or bishop to b4, check to the white king, or the alternative pawn break, chipping away at the white center with c5. All of these have been played with, moderately plus results for white. In today's feature game, black plays e5, a very old continuation, and now white plays the principled d takes e5. Karpov experimented in 2008 in an active game with c5, but after bishop e7, d takes e5, knight c5, queen c4, he lost one of his rare losses in this variation in 69 moves to Grishuk. That was an active chess game in 2008. But after e5, white's most principled response is to simply take it. And then after castles, you have the interesting queen sacrifice, e takes d6, allowing rook e8 pinning the queen. Now, queen takes check, and bishop e3. And you have to say, well, what does white have for a queen? From a material count point of view, he's got 9 points. He's got a rook, bishop, and passed pawn. He also has the 2 bishops. And the passed pawn is fairly far advanced, and black still has some development to deal with. So let's take a look. Knight f6, bishop d3, bishop e6, castles, and then b5. This has been played in about 3 or 4 games in my database from 2011. However, one of the very early games in this variation was Dorfman-Sveshnikov from the U.S. Championship in 1980, where black played rook to d6, rook to d8, obviously, contemplating taking this pawn. However, after b3, he then played bishop g4 because, of course, capturing on d6 walks into bishop h7 check with the discovered attack on the rook. King takes, rook takes d6, of course, would be winning. So let's go back. After b3, bishop to g4. Again, we're looking at the game Dorfman-Sveshnikov from 1980, one of the very early games played in this variation. Bishop f4, and now black played bishop takes, knight takes, and knight h5. But white played rook over, attacking the queen. Here, black tried to liquidate into an endgame and hold the game. Note that queen d7, rook e7. So after queen takes, rook takes, knight takes, it seems black's doing okay here. He's threatening the bishop with check, and he's threatening the pawn. However, white played rook d1, and we can see we have a classic rook plus bishop versus rook plus knight endgame where white still has managed to hold on to his pawn on d6. And again, the same trick. If rook takes d6, bishop takes h7 check. Okay? So black played c5, white played a3, black played g6. Now note there's no bishop takes check, so the pawn is threatened. Bishop e4, attacking the pawn on b7. b6, b4. And normally, if we were just concerned about the opening, we would leave off here, and we'd say, okay, white has the advantage, he's a pawn up. However, one of the good things about studying games between strong players is to check out their technique. And so I'm going to show you the rest of this game just very quickly. f5, attacking the bishop, knight check, and knight d4. And again, the bishop is attacked, the pawn is attacked. It seems like black is hanging on. But now, the fantastic rook takes, and c5. The conclusion was pawn takes, rook over check, and we can see those two monster pawns on the 6th rank are worth more than the exchange. King up, bishop check, pawn up. Now black tries to play rook b5 to attack the bishop, but c7. And this is a little touch I like because if king d7, the nice splice, bishop c6 check, king takes, and check. The game actually ended with rook c5, king d3, king d7, and bishop b7. Again, that was a game Dorfman-Sveshnikov 1980 USSR Championship, so I'm sure it's pretty well known to most Russian grandmasters. Back to our game at hand after castles, b5. And this has been the choice in a handful of games, about 4 or 5 games. c5, bishop takes a2, and now bishop to g5. Note that the logical mobilization with rook at ht1 was also played in 2011. Yang Spiros from Lubbock, Texas, of all places, part of the Texas Tech program in 2011. And that game continued briefly with queen d8, knight d4, attacking c6, bishop d5, knight to f5, queen a5, and bishop d4. And white's very, very well centralized here, and in fact went on to score the full point in 59 moves. So after bishop takes a2, rook at ht1 deserves consideration. Our game saw bishop to g5. Again, this prepares rook at hd1. Knight to d7, logical. The knight is the best blockader. Not only does it blockade, it attacks the pawn that defends the blockader. Rook at ht1, and now black uses his bishop to block the e-file. And here's where we have a new move, bishop to e3. Previously, in a 1983 game that Panchenko won with black against Ivkov, white played knight to d4, and that didn't prove as effective as black was able to hunker in and defend. So after bishop to e3, white defends his pawn on c5 and prepares to play knight g5 as well. h6 to keep the knight off. And now bishop to c2, that keeps this bishop out of b3. Queen c8, and now knight to d4. Knight takes c5, and now the very nice shot, knight to f5. This threatens the knight, threatens the fork. After bishop takes f5, bishop takes, and black had to retreat with bishop e6 because he has to keep this pawn blockaded. Let's take a look. Suppose he tries to play bishop c2, hoping for king c2, queen check, king up, queen takes, and then d7. Black has a nice finish, check, and mate. But let's go back. After bishop c2, white has the shot d7. And we can see all of the pieces are coordinated to support this little baby. After bishop d1, takes, takes, and takes, and the bishop is clearly winning. Black only has 2 pawns for it. So going back, After this fantastic shot, knight to f5, bishop takes f5, bishop takes c5. Black decided to keep the passed pawn under lock and key, and he retreated his bishop. And now, a very nice part of the game. White hurls his pawns forward in an effort to dislodge this key defender. Black blocks. White's not to be denied. Black captures that pawn, but now the quiet rook to d4, and when the bishop goes back, continuing to block off the f-file, White now sacrifices a pawn with pawn to f5. In the game, Black takes with the pawn, however this opens the g-file. We will come back. After f5, bishop takes f5. The whole point here is penetration. And now what can Black do? If bishop d7, bishop to b3. And note that the white pieces have superior mobility, and the black pieces, material-wise, Black is okay, but in terms of force, White is the one that has all the force. For example, here, bearing in on f7. Force lined up behind his passed d-pawn. After bishop e8, for example, d7, and it's pretty much lights out here. Going back, after f5, bishop takes f5, rook e7. If he tries bishop c2, well then d7, queen d8, and the simple king takes c2, and White will pretty much be able to play rook e8 check whenever he wants, and he'll have a slight advantage in the endgame, because even though Black has the 3 pawns, the bishop is very well placed and the white pieces are well placed. For example, g5, king d3, a5, rook e8, king e8, d8, and then rook e6. Rook takes, and king d4, and White should pretty much have a 1 endgame, as his king is able to walk in and mop up. So let's go back. f5. Unpleasant choices for Black. In the game, he plays g takes f5, but now, rook to g1 check. Notice that king f8, d7 is mate. So therefore, after rook g1 check, he goes king h7. But now, very nice. Doubling rooks thanks to the pin on the pawn on f5. After queen f8 to stop rook g7 check, simply bishop d4. And here you see what we talk about when we say superior mobility. Notice that this black rook is worth 5 points, but it hasn't done anything to contribute the whole game. After f6, rook into g6, and we can see the pawn on f6 is completely surrounded. After rook d8, rook takes f6, and Black had seen enough. Well, if he plays queen takes, then bishop takes f5 check, bishop takes, and rook f7 mate. And again on rook takes f6, attacking the queen, attacking the bishop. If queen e8, then you have the shot, rook takes e6, rook takes, rook g7 check, forcing the king into a discovered check, and then rook g6 check. Discovered check from the bishop, and the rook picks off the queen, leaving White a couple of bishops ahead. Fantastic creative performance, interesting from the opening point of view as far as the Slav defense goes with 6 queen c2, and in fact, Azerbaijan wound up mauling Croatia and moving up toward the top slot with a score of at least 3-1. Again, I'm Ron Henley. Thank you for joining OnlineChessLessons.net, and look forward to seeing you next time.